You know, a wise man once said, I think it was Attila the Hun, "It is not enough that I succeed. Everyone else must fail. You are going to do this for me."
We talk Superman, and we know what's happening. We talk Superman, and we cover everything.
We're in real trouble, aren't we?
Mouths closed, ears open. You are welcome to the All-Star Superfan podcast, the podcast that flicks peanuts from behind the bar at the full multimedia legacy of the Man of Steel. And I won't have anyone with me who isn't with me. Joining me tonight are two naughty guys. First up is my co-host, proud waterboy for the Smallville Crows, and lover of mayonnaise, Mr. Alan Burke. Well, Alan, long time no see, you know, see.
See. yeah, it's great. It's great to be back. I'm still suffering with the, I don't know when this episode will drop, but I'm still suffering with the Christmas bloat, as they call it. So it's great to get back into it. How are you keeping, Rob?
Absolutely great. Yeah, this is we are going to release an episode before this, but this is our first episode recording in the new year, so delighted to be back and talking about a 45-plus-year-old movie as always.
We do niche, but this is niche's niche. This is as niche as it gets.
This is one of the most random things we've ever talked about, but it's also something I've been very passionate about talking about since we started the podcast. Second up tonight is a treasured returning guest, Planet Houston's newest gift to Metropolis, Mr. Zach Moore. Zach, how many sugars?
1.5.
Very good. Very good.
Good to be here again, guys.
Oh, it's great to have you as always. And we should start the show by saying we are talking about the 1983 novelisation of Superman 3. And it's important to say because Zach sent both myself and Alan a very beautiful gift of a print by an artist on Etsy of a beautiful Houston, Texas cinema that was actually showing Superman 3, and it even reads Superman 3 on the cinema, and it's just gorgeous. I have it hanging on my wall in my living room, next to Action Comics #1 and Superman #1, and then a bunch of other kind of more normal grown up kind of painting-y type stuff. But it's a lovely little addition to the wall, and I thank you. It's a lovely gift, and all the more fitting that you be joining us here for this.
I'd show you mine, Zach, hanging up, but I'd have to move all this equipment, and so I'm afraid of knocking something over. But
I believe
it's on display here too.
Yeah, I thought of you guys when I saw that. I'm like, well, who loves Superman 3 more than these guys? So I have no idea why they chose that movie to be on the marquee, but it was meant to be. So I'm glad you guys. And it was. We won't go into it here, but it was quite a journey.
It was
to get you guys.
It was. Those. Shout out to Tom Elliott. Thank you, Tom.
Yes.
So, and before we get into the main topic at hand, it's obviously going to be a very Chris Reeve heavy episode tonight. And both myself, I spoke on friend of the show, Stuart's show, Countdown to Superman, about the Christopher Reeve documentary. And I believe, Zach, you did an episode of Always Hold On to Smallville about it. But we haven't heard Alan's thoughts on it. I wanted to just quickly hear what you made of the incredible documentary Super Slash Man, for want of a better title.
Yeah, well, I suppose like everybody else, I was really touched by it. I was meant to see it before Christmas. I had tickets to see it in a theatre in Galway, and I had to cancel that unfortunately because of work. But I got to see it here over the Christmas holidays. I watched it at home, and yeah, I found it very moving. I thought it was very powerful. I was aware of the story of his life story through Still Me, the book he wrote 25 plus years ago, and so there wasn't a lot of new information for me in terms of his accident and his recovery process and all of that. But what I found moving was just getting these insights into his life, insights into his hospital room, insights into his time with his family, both before and after the accident. I found that very powerful. And I appreciated the fact that, they spoke truly about him as a person. It wasn't kind of this sugar-coated, like everybody else. He was a fallible man. He's not Clark Kent or Superman, and he said that himself. even in the show, in the documentary itself, in the film, he says that himself. And I thought that was quite refreshing as well. But yeah, overall, I have to say, and I watched it with my wife, Stacey, who hadn't read the book and wasn't, obviously she was aware of the cornerstones of his life and the accident in 1995 and all that, but she was quite moved as well. And I have to say that the one thing that I walked away thinking about the entire thing was, number one, and not only was he an incredible person for turning what happened to him into such a positive for so many people, but I was blown away by Dana Reeve and the person that she was. And you know, when you're young, you always think of these people as being much, much older, but like, she was in her early 30s at the time. You know, it's insane the love she showed for him and the responsibility that she took. And then, as well as that, his children themselves have grown into such fine people. And there was a certain part, the part that affected me the most, I have to say, was Will Reeve. Speaking about how even though he has his stepbrothers and stepsisters and he has his extended family, he's been alone since the day that his mother passed back in 2006, and that really struck a chord with me. But I have to say, overall, I think it was a beautiful film. Was
there anything in particular, knowing as much as you do, because you've read Still Me, haven't you?
Yeah, twice, 2-3 times, I think.
Yeah, I've read both of his books, actually. Have you read both of his books, Alan?
Yeah, I've read both, yeah.
What's the name of the other one again? I remember there was Still Me and then there was a follow-up.
Nothing is Impossible, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's. I have it on my bookshelf, but I'd have to go out to get it.
Everything's out of reach, out of sight for you today, Alan.
Everything's out of reach, out of sight. This is the problem when your office door is a bookcase. You know, all the books on the opposite side. But yeah, it's again very powerful, and I think you can get that in audio format as well. I think that's on. Audible.
It's not at least the last time I checked, it wasn't, and I was really annoyed about this because obviously the documentary uses Christopher Reeve. The audiobook version throughout, you know, as voiceover. They did something similar in the Leonard Nimoy documentary. And I was like, wow, I really want to listen to Christopher Reeve tell me his life story. And I went on Audible, it wasn't there. Now, I'm sure there's other ways of finding it.
Well, I definitely have it on CD.
Oh, okay.
I'd be more than happy to give that to you.
Excellent. I was going to ask you, though, Alan, and to you, Zach, as well, like, knowing as much as you both do about his life and his life story, what were the biggest sort of surprises for both of you coming away from this?
Well, I'd read both of his books. I think, I was in college, so it was actually right after he had passed away, unfortunately. So it's bittersweet reading those, because it's very hopeful, and then he had just passed away 2-3 years before I read them. So I remembered a lot, and a lot of stuff I'd probably forgotten over the years because, gosh, it's been almost 20 years now, right? So I guess I had either forgotten or maybe they didn't go into it very much in the book, but like his early family life, coming from like a broken home and his securities with like his parents and especially his dad's like approval of him, that sort of thing. I was like, wow, okay. Like I just had never, either I had forgotten or I'd never clicked with me before. So that stuck out to me. And then as well, getting to hear from Gay Exton, his mother of his first 2 children, because I had never seen any interview or read anything from her, and she plays a crucial part of the documentary and really shines a lot of light on their relationship, obviously. So to me, those were the things that really stuck out to me because, as you said, Rob, we know so much about, when he got cast as Superman. Yeah. Obviously that's great to see, but it was great that this still had stuff for people like us who have been in this world so long.
Yeah. What about you, Alan?
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. I found it so interesting that, he tried so hard to not be like his father, and then like so many people who try to do that, myself included, who try to be something different to their own father, end up being so much like them in adulthood, despite their best efforts or whatever. It's strange how that works out. I was actually talking to my father about that recently. But yeah, that and I was very surprised, actually. It's not really to do with his life as such, but I was very surprised because I remembered it much differently. The response that they depicted to remember the commercial he did where he walked, the CGI commercial?
Yeah.
I remember that being, in my own mind, extremely well received and positively
that's what I mean.
received.
I think that's in our circles, right? Like, wasn't that cool? But like you, Alan, that was surprising. That was a point of controversy. That was surprising to me as well.
Yeah, and obviously, Rob, you with your dad's background working, with organizations such as that, and would obviously have a much better insight into that. And obviously, it is the case that it wasn't well received by everybody. And rightly so, to be honest. Like looking back on it, I can completely see why. But I remember that being super, so much so that when I was watching with Stacey, when he was preparing to give the Oscar speech, Stacey turned to me and she was like, "Oh, is this where he gets up and walks on the stage, but it's kind of computer generated?" And I was like, "No, that's later." I said, "That happened later," and I actually said to her at the time, and everybody loved it. And then when I watched it, I was like, everybody did not love it. I have to say those were the things that surprised me.
No, I've mentioned this once or twice. My dad worked for Spinal Injuries Ireland for a couple of years, and they had a lot of dealings with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. And I watched a screening of this with my dad and about 50 or 60 service users. So people in wheelchairs were watching this with me, and it was an amazing way to watch it. And I did bring that point up afterwards. I was like, that he was a little bit of a figure of controversy in that way. And I liked that the film addressed that, that really Dana Reeve was the person driving what we now call, Christopher Reeve is thinking about the cure, the number one cure to get out of the chair. Dana Reeve was the one really who was actually living with him day to day and thinking of all the ways that his day-to-day accessibility needed to be improved. And she really spearheaded a lot of that stuff. And the way they refer to those sort of accessibility things, the little things that are improved day to day for service users, they're called cures. So instead of a focus on a cure, it's a focus on cures. And I'd never really heard that before. And the film kind of gave me that perspective. So I really, really like that. I would say the biggest thing that surprised me going into it, I was kind of like, well, I know all of this. It's going to be very emotional. It's going to be very nice, but I kind of know all of it. Two things that surprised me. It only really clicked for me watching that, oh God, his kids are all adults now. And they've had to reflect on this as adults. For, it never occurred to me. I still think of like Will Reeve as being the little child you see beside Dana and Chris at these award shows and things. But he's actually like an adult man. He's the same age as us now. And he's had to reflect on this as an adult. I thought that was really, really interesting. And it was amazing hearing from Matthew Reeve, who was there when like Superman 3 was being made. He was like, alive and remembers it, I thought that was really cool. And I was surprised myself. I kind of went into it going, you know what, it's going to be really cringy when they try to kind of compare the journey he went through to like that of a superhero. But it wasn't at all. It really, really worked, all that stuff, I thought. And there's a bit kind of in the third act where it's Christopher Reeve, the man, addressing some very large, I think it's like the Democratic National Convention or something like that. And he's doing a big fundraising outreach. And then they compare that to the scene in Superman 4 where he's addressing the UN. And it sounds like it shouldn't work, but it absolutely did. Oh. And it's almost like the film is making the case that, yes, he was not Clark Kent or Superman, but he did in fact become a Superman later on as a result of everything he went through and embracing that experience and turning it into a force for good. And like that all really, really worked for me. And I was really, really surprised by that, I have to say.
I had similar reservations about that sort of thing because I'm like, look, guys, like I love all this stuff, but I'm like, I don't know if we could do that. But it's a really fine needle to thread, and they did it very well throughout the documentary. I too was very skeptical about that going in, and it was completely won over by how they wove it all together. Absolutely, Rob.
Even the those kind of I don't know what you call them, intermissions or whatever, but those little shots to the statue of Christopher Reeve, kind of in a flying pose or a reaching out pose, and then they would depict the injuries that he sustained as being like green kryptonite on his neck, and like again, if you explained that to me, I would like, oh no, don't do that.
Absolutely.
But I thought it worked, and I thought it looked very classy, and I thought it was very tastefully done. And yeah, I was very impressed with the entire thing. I have to say, when you mentioned Matthew Reeve there, my heart absolutely. I spoke about Will earlier. My heart absolutely broke for Matthew in the scene where he depicts not making it to his father's deathbed because he was in the taxi when he got the call. I mean, that broke my heart. Absolutely broke my heart. I highly recommend people check it out. It's well worth viewing. Even if like us, you've read the books. Both books. If you've read them both and you think you're familiar with the story, it's still worth seeing.
Actually, just very quickly while I think of it as well, I watched another similar-ish documentary on Christmas Day from Roger Moore with Love.
Really?
It was on the BBC. It was on the same time as the Gavin and Stacey finale, so we had to tape it and watch it afterwards.
Yeah, you have to explain to Zach what that is.
I don't know what that is.
Gavin and Stacey is a beloved UK sitcom that's been running for a long time, and they aired the final kind of Christmas special episode on Christmas Day.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, the dad in Gavin and Stacey is one of the miners from the final scene of Superman 3 when he drops Gus Gorman.
Not only that, but I learned for the first time that he's in the Daily Planet scene in Superman the movie. Someone posted that on one of our socials, and that blew my mind. I was like, "What?"
He's one of those jobbing British actors who was on Pinewood Studios back in the day, and he's in not one but possibly two, maybe even three Superman movies. Larry Lamb, God bless you, please come on the show. But From Roger Moore with Love, it's basically a documentary about Roger Moore's life. I talk about James Bond a lot on this show as well. It's a lot of fun. Roger Moore did not have as turbulent, I will say, a life as Christopher Reeve. He basically got famous, had a number of different turbulent marriages, but he seemed to just have a blessed life. And then he went on and he did his great work for UNICEF and all that kind of stuff. And it's basically just that they interview really, really legendary actors. Christopher Walken shows up in like modern day. Christopher Walken comes on and talks about how much he liked Roger Moore on the set of A View to a Kill. Joan Crawford is there. There's a bunch of just absolute heavyweights talking about Roger Moore, and it's just a really, really lovely watch, especially if you love James Bond. And I know you're a big James Bond fan as well, Zach. So check that one out if you can. The only thing I would say I was disappointed by was Michael Caine doesn't show up, which is a bit weird and slightly concerning because maybe it's just that he's not.
Oh, right, because they were dear friends, right?
They were like legendary friends. Like,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, like everywhere, they went everywhere together. They were the best of friends. There's all these pictures of them together. Like Michael Caine, from time to time, will post pictures of him and Roger Moore on Twitter. He's still on Twitter, and he will like they were great friends. So it's weird that like they mention him twice in the documentary, but there's no word from him or anything like that.
Was Jane Seymour in it?
Jane Seymour was in it, yeah.
Okay, see, now, to tie back to what we were just talking about, I actually was very surprised she was not in Super/Man.
It's a good point.
Well, the only thing about that, though, is...
take it away, Alan.
They kind of glossed over the whole kind of relationship with Gay and just before the first pregnancy, because I think there was a little break there and there was a relationship with Jane Seymour, and that was completely glossed over. And I think Jane Seymour has come out subsequently to say that she was, she had very strong feelings for Chris.
Yeah.
So maybe it was just a tasteful thing.
I agree. I don't. It might have been a case where they might have interviewed her and then just left it out because it kind of wouldn't really fit the story they were telling, but because they fell in love making Somewhere in Time, and then Gay Exon's pregnant with a child of mine. We gotta not continue this. So I understand them not including her, but it was just anyway. Since she was in Roger Moore, I was curious to know if she was.
I actually paused it during the film, and I was like, turned to Stacey, I was like, right, this is what you don't know.
But hey, to her credit, she didn't really come out with any of that until just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So that is new information.
Yeah, incredible still though that allegedly happened.
Right.
So. On to our main topic of discussion tonight. We are talking about the 1983 novelization of Superman 3 by author William Kotzwinkle. Now, before we do that, I want to just clarify one thing, and that is what a novelization actually is, because there can be different schools of thought on this, right? So, for example, I would say that Batman Resurrection, which came out recently, that is not a novelization.
Correct.
Because it doesn't adapt an existing text. It's a new story.
Is there confusion about this terminology? I agree with you, but
just in case anyone is confused. So a novelization is literally an adaptation of an existing text, be it a TV episode, a movie, a video game, whatever, into a prose novel form. So, for example, all the Star Wars movies have novelizations. Most of the Star Trek movies have novelizations. Anytime a movie comes out first and then they do a book of the story of the movie, that is a novelization. And there's a bunch of really good ones. There's a bunch of pretty standard ones that aren't great. But I think it's kind of a lost art form because they're not written as often as they used to be because of spoiler culture now. So you don't see them as much. But growing up, there was novelizations for like every movie. I read the Flubber novelization when I was a kid. The Scooby-Doo movie had a great novelization. And like the great thing about them was they could elaborate on things that maybe were glossed over in the film or weren't explained fully. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But I wanted to just ask you guys first. Are there novelizations? Is it a format you're into? Are there ones that you like or dislike, or how do you feel about it? Because people have mixed feelings about novelizations. They kind of see them as a bit redundant sometimes. I'll start with you, Zach.
Yeah, I have read quite a few novelizations in my time, being a big Star Trek fan, being a Star Wars fan. Either, my parents had these novelizations and I inherited them from them, or over the years I get novelizations. I feel like, as you said, you can expand on things. You get different characters' points of view. I mean, back before, right, home video was so prevalent. It was like, do you want to relive the experience of the movie? You get the soundtrack, and you get the novel, and you get the action figure. All these things, all the merchandise that went along with it. It was part of the big merchandising push of all these movies. So, I gotta say, probably my favorite novelization is Batman 1989, by Craig Shaw Gardner is the author. And it's just the way that it approaches a movie that I've watched maybe more than any other movie, right? It's just getting those different points of view and expanding on things and filling in, potential plot holes and connecting dots. And and a lot of times in these novelizations, you get to see, what would become deleted scenes in the final film because it's based off an early version of the script. That's also something interesting in novelizations. Sometimes they're quite different than the final film because they're based off earlier scripts. So, I love them. I love novelizations, and it just, it's like a cover of a song, right? It's like you love the song and you want to experience that in a different way, in a different form, the same thing. And, for ones that I really, really like, I love reading novelization.
Yeah, I have to, before we go to you, Alan, I have to echo Batman 89. That's my favorite one as well. And it's just, I won't say it's a masterpiece. I won't go that far, but it is really, really good, especially the first chapter. Just the prose in that first chapter. Welcome to Gotham City, punk. It's so, so well done. And it just paints a picture of that scene incredibly well. A lot of the dialogue is different in it. And not
I
for
am
the
the
better.
knight.
I am the knight. Like, you're trespassing, rat breath. Like, all that stuff that they cut out and they sort of streamlined in the movie for the better, I think. But there's other stuff that's different in it that is, I think, better in the novelization. And there's stuff like the whole reason Sean Young didn't play Vicky Vale is because she was injured because she was training for the horse riding scene.
Yeah.
That wasn't in the movie, but that's still in the novel. And then similarly, there's a bit where Bruce Wayne is chasing the Joker on a horse. Now, if that sounds familiar to anyone, it's because there's a Robin sequence that tied into that at one point, but that Robin isn't in this book. But there is a really cool scene where you see Bruce Wayne on a horse chasing after the Joker, and then he becomes Batman. And I'd say they probably thought it was too silly or something, but it just bridges. It's a really nice sequence in the book because it bridges the gap between the scene in Vicky's apartment to the final battle with the Joker later on. There's a couple of stuff like that, and then finally. There's one bit in that just really sticks with me after all these years. Is there's a bit where Vicky Vale is piecing together all the facts and she's learning that Bruce is Batman. And this must have been something that Craig Shaw Gardner came up with himself, because I don't understand how they could have put it in the screenplay. There's a bit where she realizes that he recently turned 37, which was the same age as Thomas Wayne when he died, and that he must have become Batman at that age because that's the age his father was. And it just makes the whole thing sound even more tragic and like almost like something a psychopath would do.
Which this Batman is.
Which this Batman is. And it always struck me as just being just so tragic and beautiful and such a lovely little touch that isn't in the movie and is just completely unique to this novel. And I love that book so much. The Batman Returns one that he also wrote.
Thank you. I was about to say that. Yes, 30 seconds on this. One of the most disappointing ones is like I discovered this gem of a project in the Batman 89 novelization. Like, oh my God, the same guy wrote Batman Returns. I can't wait to see how he expand. It's like the script in prose form. There is no addition. There's no depth. It's disappointing. I don't know. Maybe he had less time to do it or something. But yes, the Batman Returns one is the opposite of that, unfortunately.
And in a way, it's the perfect example of the two types of novelizations that you get. It's like some of them are just these incredible expansions of the mythology of the story, and with a brand new set of eyes. And then other ones are just, well, here's the script, and we've reformatted it a bit. What about you, Alan?
As you know, Rob, I'm not a huge fan of novelizations. Okay,
Okay.
we've spoken about this. We've spoken about
There's
this.
been a bit of over and back. Yeah,
There's
true.
been a bit of over and back with this. But to be fair, number one, I haven't read many novelizations, okay? To be honest, and I don't know if I said this before, I know I've definitely said to you in conversation before, I don't really enjoy reading fiction. I don't know why that is. It's crazy, really, considering everything that I do love in terms of superheroes and film and all that kind of stuff. And I think, harking back to my point earlier on about fathers, growing up, me and my dad were complete opposites. My dad is kind of a biker dude. He's in a bike club. We're completely opposite people. Love him to bits. He's coming up tomorrow. Can't wait to see him. Love you, Dad.
Grew up in a lot of biker bars, Alan?
Yeah, I grew up in a lot of biker bars and going to bike rallies, and I had leather jackets, and all his friends had crazy names and all sorts of stuff. But my dad isn't into anything like superhero related or science fiction related. But all he ever read growing up, when I was growing up in the house, were these like Lord of the Rings-esque huge books. These like fictional swords and sorcery books. That's all he read. That and history about Stalingrad and things like that. But when I was growing up, all there was in the house was these big tomes of science, not science fiction, but swords and sorcery books and stuff. And reading it as a kid, it always felt a little bit like homework, I think, and I always struggled to kind of picture this stuff in my mind. When I read now as an adult, and it might be low-hanging fruit, but I like to read autobiographies, and I like to read what I hate. The term I hate saying is true crime, but I love reading books, especially from the police investigation side of stuff. I'm not huge into reading fiction, but saying that, I have read some great fiction books. Don't get me wrong. Overall, I kind of feel about novelizations the same way I feel about like director's cuts of movies and stuff. I feel they're a little bit redundant. Sometimes I think that we have editors for a reason, and I don't really need to see the 3-hour cut. And that's kind of how I feel about novelizations.
Well, that's the same. It's just a different side of the coin I'm talking about. Where like I like having these other versions of something I can watch. Like, do I want to watch the same thing 7 times? Or do I want to watch or experience the thing 7 different ways? So I hear you though, Alan. I
get that.
To that point, and you have made that point, and it is a fair point, and you've made it in the past. I don't view these as director's cuts. I nearly view them as, what if the film was made by another director altogether? You know, that kind of way, that it's like you're seeing it from a completely different perspective, because in the same way that like a comic book artist takes a comic book script and has to become essentially the film director, in the same way that a film director takes a screenplay and has to interpret it and decide the bits that deserve all the attention for the audience. That's exactly what a novelization author is doing. They're taking an existing text and they're trying to decipher what the most important parts are to present to the reader. And that can be a completely different interpretation to what, you know, the actual film director decides, you know? And I think the one we're about to talk about tonight, I would argue that that's the case. I think Kotzwinkle had a very different directorial stamp on this particular story than Richard Lester, the actual director of the film. Before we finish on just novelizations in general, I made it, when you're talking about your dad being a biker, and I made a Batman Forever quote there. Ladies, fellows and girls, the Batman Forever novelization, holy God. Like, all these people banging on about the Schumacher cut on Twitter, guess what? You can find it, you can read it, you can hold it in your hands. Batman Forever, by the great comic book writer Peter David, by the way.
Yes.
It is excellent. It is truly, truly excellent. All the stuff is in there, all the deleted scenes. It's presented in the way that the movie was presented. There is a passage in that novelization where the scene where Bruce encounters the giant bat, I don't have it to hand, but I was so moved by the way that he described that in that book that I actually cut it out and pasted it on my wall as a teenager because I loved it so much. It is
incredible.
It is a truly, truly excellent, and there's other stuff in there that isn't in the film at all.
Well, it ties back into Batman Returns. It tries to kind of actually make this a follow up. Like there's a Harvey Dent Batman meeting to kind of clean up. Hey, I didn't kill all those people in the last movie. Like it's very clever, very well done. I mean, I'm gonna go after this. I mean, not today, but I'm gonna go reread these Batman novels.
And let me tell you something. I found an old blog post on Peter David's blog from a million years ago where he said that he absolutely hated Akiva Goldsman because he hated the script for Batman Forever so much and it kept changing and it was a miserable experience writing it. So it
Wow.
just goes to show, like, you don't have to enjoy your work for it to be excellent, you know?
So let me just clarify something. There's novelization for 89 returns Batman Forever. Is there one for Batman and Robin?
Yes, there is.
Yes.
And in fact, our good friend Neil Ricketson recently posted an audiobook version on his YouTube channel, 1995batman.com on YouTube. One of his listeners actually, or one of his fans actually recorded the audiobook because it didn't exist prior to that, and they did a beautiful job of it.
Oh,
You can
wow.
find it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can find it all on YouTube. It's solid. It leans a little bit closer to the Batman Returns novelization insofar as it's kind of just the movie as you know it with a couple of very small little flourishes. It's nowhere near as good as the Batman Forever one or the Batman 89 one.
I do not own the Batman and Robin one. If I ever come across it at a half price book, which is a store that I love and I've mentioned all the time on my podcast, as people are probably aware of, I will buy it. But that's kind of where I am. But I have the other three.
So do the other Superman movies have novelizations?
My God, Alan, am I glad you asked that question, right? So the situation is this. Our old friend Mario Puzo owns the story rights to Superman 1 and 2. So no. So they couldn't do a novelization without paying him a bag of cash, basically, and they weren't willing to do that. So instead, we have these Elliot S. Magan novels, which I also love, and I'd love to do an episode about someday, which are just completely bonkers Bronze Age Superman standalone stories. And one of them is called The Last Son of Krypton, and it purports to be about Kal-El coming to Earth and meeting Lex Luthor for the first time and all that. It's kind of true, but it's also just, it's completely its own thing. And then he did another one called Miracle Monday. Both of them have Christopher Reeve on the cover, and they have like pictures of the movies in them. Absolutely nothing to do with the movies at all.
What a bait and switch.
And then Superman 4 has a junior novelization, so it's aimed at younger readers, and I think it kind of skims a little bit more than Superman 3 does. Now, I haven't read it in full. I have kind of I've kind of skimmed through it a few times, and I'm pleased to say, much like the Batman Forever one, the Superman 4 novelization again is the full-fledged Fury cut of the movie. So if you're interested in reading the whole thing of what the story was originally going to be, you can read the novelization as well. But I don't think it's quite as interesting as the one we're going to talk about. Okay, Superman 3, 1983, by William Kotzwinkle, the author of E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
As it says on the cover, proudly.
Do you know what else he wrote, Zach? And I know you'll like this.
Tell me.
E.T. and the Journey to the Green Planet.
Oh, the sequel.
The Book of the Green Planet, which was put... Now, I don't know anything about this. Literally minutes before we went on the air, I looked up William. I said, I better check what else he's written. He wrote the sequel to E.T.
Yeah.
And I know you're a theme park fan.
Yes.
The theme park ride is based on this.
It's based off this. If anyone's ever been to Universal Studios, and the one of them is still open, the one in Florida, the ET ride, still exists. I love theme parks. I love history. I get disappointed when old rides get destroyed. So on one hand, I'm like, I'm really glad this still exists, right? Hypothetically, right? But I actually wrote it a couple years ago, and well, you know what? It's very dated. I think we should move on from it. But no, it's.
I have never disclosed this to you, Rob. Okay, I have a legitimate phobia of ET.
Classic.
Legitimate phobia. He freaks me
Alan.
out. Big time.
Alan.
Big
Well,
time. I think I watched it when I was too young. There was an instant when I was watching it when there was a scene. I'm actually starting to sweat thinking about it, believe it or not. There's a scene in ET where I think he's dying in a bathtub or something.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen E.T. since I was 4 years of age because I refused to watch it. Okay. Wow. There's a scene in the bathtub where he's dying. I remember it vividly. And I got so distraught as a child that I turned around, I jumped up on my mother, and whatever way I jumped up on her, I accidentally broke her nose. And it was like this.
You broke her nose.
I broke her nose. And it was like broke. Like there was blood and everything. And it's obviously just kind of settled in me, deep down in my psyche, that like even if I see a trailer for it, or like I couldn't even watch the YouTube video where they review the Atari game That's how bad my phobia is of it. It is literally legit.
Well, let me tell you, Alan, I have also been to Universal. I've also been on that ride. And let me tell you, next time we're in Florida together, I'm going to bring you there. I'm going to make you face your fears.
Never happened.
Because if memory serves, you're looking at like an entire planet of ETs, and they're all singing.
That is your own personal hell, it sounds like, Alan. That's right.
Yeah,
because you go to the green planet, which is ET's home planet, and there's dozens of animatronics of these aliens everywhere. It's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre.
And they sing the John Williams theme to you. So it's like,
yeah. My biggest fear is that I'm going to be sitting in a theater someday and they're going to like announce an ET sequel where it's the theme just played on a piano really slowly, and I'm just going to run out of there screaming.
Okay, from one green planet to another. Superman 3 by William Kotzwinkle. I'll throw it over to you, Zach, because I feel like I've been building this thing up for years to both of you now. What was your just roundabout kind of overview of what your overall thoughts of the book were reading it for the first time?
Well, I received this book from a listener. A lot of times I get, I call them care packages or thank yous from listeners. I get sent memorabilia and other things, and I can't remember exactly who it was, so I apologize. But I've had this for quite a few years, and then hearing you sing its praises for a while, Rob, I'm like, oh, that's interesting, and I'm glad that we're doing this because it finally gave me the reason, the excuse to sit down and read this, and wow. Movies in the 80s, family movies, right? They were a lot more adult than family movies are now. And boy, is that come through in this novelization, because there were just some things in here that I had to I know I took some pictures and sent it to people in your post. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, it was a joy actually to read that. I mean, Superman 3, I don't love it as much as y'all, but I enjoy it. It's a Christopher Reeve Superman film. So to revisit it through here and to get this I would never would think anyone would write a novelization of a Superman movie in this way. And that is why it is fascinating to me. Just the things that he decides, William Kotzwinkle decides to go in depth on are just like, I don't know why you did that, but it's interesting. And then other things he just totally, to me, like, for example, the chemical plant rescue. That's like a page and a half. That's it. And then, but then we talk about Gus Gorman and his yo-yos for like chapters at a time. So just the disproportionate attention paid. It was a fascinating read.
I want to break down certain characters and how he treats them one by one in a bit, because God, Gus Gorman in this is just, you can talk about him for days. But Alan, give me your overview on it before we do that.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Like sitting down and reading a book about what is arguably my favorite Superman movie. I'm always reluctant to say that because I know it's not the best Superman movie, but it's the one that I just love to go back to over and over again. So sitting down and watching someone else's perspective on it and getting a glimpse inside the minds of some of the characters and stuff, loved all that. There was elements that I was iffy about. There was definitely kind of treatment of certain characters that I wasn't too sure. There was elements of it that I thought were a little bit ugly. I'll get into that later on, that I didn't really like. But saying that, like, getting a richer exploration of Clark's nostalgia for Smallville and his feelings for Lana, getting more of Lana's perspective about her struggles kind of as a single mom in Smallville, all that kind of stuff I thoroughly enjoyed. Way too much yo-yos. Way too much yo-yos for me. Rob is shaking his head. Rob wants more yo-yos for Rob. And I'll get into that later on, but it's kind of an example of what I don't like about these kind of books, is where I think sometimes writers kind of pick on something very small in a film and then focus on it for too long. That's my own personal feeling on it. His descent, I enjoyed the exploration into his descent into the kind of
and this is going to be a big part of the discussion tonight.
His descent into darkness and the psychological effects of that, and what was kind of represented in the film, but maybe didn't really come across as it does in this book anyway. Whether it was intended to in the films or not, I'm not sure. But in this book, a much deeper sense of what was actually going on inside Clark at the time, and what I found fascinating was that connection to Krypton I found very interesting as well. A lot of stuff there that I really liked. To be honest, I think it fell a little bit short. I would have liked to have seen kind of more into the same depth into people like Ross. I was very disappointed that we didn't get into Lorelei a lot more, because that entire thing with Lorelei in the film never really goes anywhere. And I was really hoping that it would go somewhere in the book, and it didn't really go anywhere either. So little things like that. There was things in the film that I wish if I was to re-edit Superman 3, there's things I would love to take out that I was hoping the book would take out that they didn't, and then there was stuff in the book that I was kind of wondering why it was there at all. But overall, I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book.
Okay, good. Yeah, so I'll preface this by saying I'm probably going to criticize Superman 3 a lot here. So I just need to say up top, I absolutely love Superman 3. I watched it on Christmas Day at like 1 o'clock in the morning because, Saoirse and I were still up drinking and the parents had gone to bed, and was like,
I just want to say, I always know when Rob is a few whiskeys in, because I get screenshots of Superman 3 at 2 a.m.
Yeah. And like I can quote every line of the film. I've watched Superman 3 more than I've watched the sunrise on a Saturday morning. Like, I've seen it so many times. But I would comfortably say it is my least favorite. And yet it is my least favorite of the four, because I don't believe there's any substance in the film at all. I think it is just fun kind of Superman doing Superman stuff. He goes on a little holiday. He has a little flirt with Lana. And then it's just Richard Pryor doing a bunch of stuff. And then Superman is exposed to kryptonite completely independent of anything that is his fault. He's exposed to kryptonite that magically turns him evil. And then he turns good at the end. And there's no substance to any of that. It's never really explored in any meaningful way. And I would argue that the other three films do explore those kinds of things in a meaningful way. He has a meaningful character arc. Yes, they're flawed in all three of those films, but there's a meaningful character arc in all three of those films for Superman that isn't in Superman 3 for me. And it's like, it's a problem I come up with against a lot more as an adult, trying to mine anything else out of these films. It's like, well, there's nothing to mine out of Superman 3. And I think, Zach, you and Anthony had a great discussion about it just recently, where you're like, why didn't they? Why didn't they give some kind of foundation for this darkness that's inside of him, like they would later do on Smallville or Superman and Lois or the Snyder films or all these other versions where they give that like actual nuance and meaning. And like I'm reminded of John Schneider in Smallville season 3, or I think it's season 2. It's the end of Red, where Clark is like, oh, the dad, that wasn't me, it was the Rock or whatever. He's like, yeah, well, Clark, those feelings came from somewhere. That makes evil Superman mean something. And in Superman 3, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a magic rock, and then he turns good at the end, and it's fine.
Yeah.
In this book, it means something, and I love that. You know, and I absolutely love that. To your point, Alan, yes, this is not this magical, super duper Batman Forever Schumacher cut type situation where it fixes all the problems with Superman 3. There is still a litany of problems in this book. And in fact, yes, that there are dated elements that are of the film that are made even more dated in the book. The way their author writes the dialogue for Gus Gorman is a problem. And it's such a problem that like I have such reverence for this book that I've toyed with like recording an audiobook for it, the whole thing, just to put out on YouTube, so people can just listen to it. But I'm like, yeah, but then you'd have to do the Gus Gorman stuff, and I can't do that, and I don't think anyone would want to do that. I don't think anyone would want to listen to that. It's written in that old style way of like white people trying to write black characters in a way that isn't okay now, and it wasn't okay then. So that's a problem. And then there's other stuff like, Zach, I think you alluded to it. This is a horny ass book.
Oh, big time.
And there's a lot of that stuff. And I know that like that was a big part of how these movies were marketed. It's like, this is the sexy version of Superman. Like, Superman is a sex symbol now. And that's cool and that's good. But like, they maybe pushed the boat a little bit too far with some of that in this, I think. But I would say you can really tell, I think you said this as well, Zach, you can really tell the parts of the book where William Kotzwinkle was like really engaged and really interested and really just supercharged to call back to the first two movies and the kind of magic, grandiose feeling that Donner created and Jeffrey Unsworth and all these guys. And then you get to these other parts where it's like, okay, well, here's the script. And we're just going through the motions. But there are certain I've a bunch of screen grabs here. There's certain kind of prose passages in this where I'm like, that is hauntingly beautiful.
I thought the same thing. I was like, "Damn, this is some poetry here." I was it kind of took me by surprise.
And
Surprised me through the book.
it's about Superman 3. Like, you know, it'd be like if you told me that Power Rangers the movie had a novelization like this. And if it does, please let me know, you know?
I tell you what he's not interested in is, and rightly so, because what I didn't want to read was 14, 15, 20 pages about like him saving the nuclear or saving the chemical plant. The junkyard scene is trimmed down to like 2-3 pages, I think. It's very short.
It's trimmed down to 6 pages, and I've screen grabbed every single one of them because it's incredible.
I thought it was fantastic, though. His interpretation of that,
and that's not a slight. I was really hoping that would be slimmed down, and I think the focus is on the right place. It's on the psychological aspect of all of that, more so the internal, more so than the external. And you know, I don't need to hear about him throwing tires on evil Superman, or you know, taking his jacket off after the acid is thrown on him. Like, I've seen all that, so I have to say that that was a positive in my book.
So I guess will we break down kind of characters a little bit? And I want to end with Superman because I think that'll be the most significant one. But so I suppose Brad Wilson, first of all, Zach, you know, did you notice did anything kind of stand out to you about Brad Wilson in this, or did you get any new information, or was anything interesting about him for you?
I guess he had a beer company and it failed. That was new information, right? We didn't know that before, did we?
He was a distributor for a beer company, and then he lost his job, and then a guy that he used to play football with owns Wheat King, I guess, and he gave him the job where he meets Gus later in the movie.
Totally tracks.
Nice little bit of backstory, you know?
Yeah. I've always I mean, I thought, you know what? I mean, he was a one-dimensional character in the movie. He's probably a 1.5-dimensional character here in the novel. So I'll take it. I'll take it because all that tracks.
And I'd like to add as well, his exit from the movie is he's on the dinner cart and he rolls into the elevator or whatever it is. There's a line in this that I wish was in the movie.
It's the old couple, is it?
The old couple sees him roll past on the dinner cart into the elevator, and the woman looks at her husband and goes, "No wonder she sent it back."
Yeah, I like all those little touches in it, to be fair.
And very so good. On a similar note, because he is also a 1.5 dimensional character in this, Jimmy Olsen. I feel like, Alan, you might have some thoughts on how Jimmy is written in this.
No, not particularly. I didn't think nothing really stood out to me with regards to him. Like he's I didn't think he was too dissimilar from what he was in the movie.
It's not even the way his actions are. It's more just the way the author describes him. So obviously Jimmy has that whole story in the movie about how his aunt cooks the stuffing outside
and
the
boss,
turkey.
Yeah. And Clark is very negative about that.
He's fading fast.
It's like, and my auntie, my uncle, he likes it inside the bird, but my aunt, she cooks it outside the bird. And Clark's like, Well, the author just clung to this imagery of turkey and stuffing, and like refers back to it like throughout Jimmy's whole experience at the chemical plant fire. He's like, unfortunately, Jimmy was cooked outside the bird.
Yeah.
That's that like 3 or 4 times.
Well, and then he just kind of brush through. I mean, that's my point about the chemical factory, or one of them, like brushing through it. I kind of lost track. I'm like, where's Jim? Oh yeah. I would have expected a little more time spent on what he was doing, but it's like, I'm going to climb up here. And then Superman finds him like in the fire. And that's like, I don't know. They really don't. Yeah. They could have given you more, because that's literally the only thing Jimmy Olsen does in this movie. They're not interested in it. Other than, I mean, he's part of the beginning montage, of course, but that's just the worst thing ever. So best not to spend time on that.
Maybe not a character thing as such, but one interesting addition they do make, and this might have been in the script, and apologies, I kind of meant to skim through the script to check some of these things, but the one thing they kind of do add to the chemical fire thing is that the mad scientist who introduces Superman to the Beltric acid or whatever, a very, very one-note character in the movie, but they kind of make him into a kooky Dr. Klein sort of Professor Pepperwinkle type guy in this. because he has this like he's experimenting with bread mold or something like that.
Is that later on when he comes back after
Yeah,
the
and he
cave?
gets some on his thumb at the end of the movie.
He gets it on his thumb. Yeah.
They set it up at the chemical plant thing. It's like, oh, Superman, like I'm trying to look after this bread mold experiment, but the Belchic acid is about to melt down. Can you help me? And then later on in the novel, it's like the bread mold has like spread onto his hand, and Superman uses his heat vision to melt it off. And he's like, "Oh, thank you. If you hadn't done that, it would have spread all over my body in the space of half an hour." Just a nice little mad scientist quirk. I don't know if it would have worked in the movie, but I thought it was.
No, the way they describe him, they literally call him a mad scientist, like in the novel, which I'm like, oh, I thought he was just the guy that worked at the plant. Like in the movie, you just think he's an employee, like doing his job, but they do inject some sort of personality to him here for sure.
So, okay, so let's get on to the real meat of sort of the characters. I don't really think there was too much different. Did you mention something about Lana that you noticed, Alan? That Lana was.
Yeah, I just thought that it gave a nice, not too much. I mean, it doesn't delve into her in a huge way, but just a little more into how she's feeling as a single mother in the situation. She's got this creep Brad chasing after her. She kind of has these feelings for Clark. She's obviously coming out of her separation or her divorce from her ex-husband. And I think it gave a better look into where she is during the course of that movie. And I appreciated that. I thought that was well done.
I liked what they did with Lana. I especially liked her point of view on how Clark is acting. And she's like,
yeah.
Well, maybe he is just an idiot. Maybe I'm wrong, because that there was 2 or 3 instances of that. Also, again, talking about the horniness of the film, I believe they use some sort of euphemism about her losing her virginity.
Oh wow.
To her to her high school boyfriend who became her husband. It's like there's something about
mayonnaise.
Yeah. No.
Oh God, Rob.
Donald love mayonnaise.
Donald love mayonnaise. What are you talking about?
No, but there's something in here about like, oh yeah, the on a lover's lane. There's just I'm like, oh, but and I probably wouldn't have been in that mindset if the book didn't continuously give us these sexual situations. So anyway, that's really all there is to say about Lana. Really, I don't think there is that much more at the end. It's more from Clark's end, I guess, that whole relationship.
Well, to your point, though, Zach, I would say though that the way certain scenes read between Lana and Clark in this, it feels like Lana is being a little bit more forward than she is in the finished film. And again, like that read to me like a directorial stamp that William Kotzmiegel was choosing. Like he describes her like brushing off his hand and and like looking at him longingly and stuff like that you kind of get in the film, but like not necessarily, that sort of way.
I think she's just that little bit more fully realized in the book than she is in the film. Just again, it's not this huge deep dive into her. It's just she has a little bit more agency about her, I think, in the book. Which I appreciate. And I love. I know you have issues with the Lana Lang character, Rob. You think she's a bit of a, the nerd dream girl next door kind of. I maybe it's because it's Annette O'Toole. I was never a huge Lana guy in general in relation to the comics or the other shows or even Smallville, to be honest. But maybe it's just Annette O'Toole's portrayal in the film that I just find her really endearing in that film, and I think this adds to that a little bit.
Yeah. I have found the passage, my friends. If you would indulge me.
Wow, that was quick work.
Absolutely.
This is Lana, and this is the scene where her and Clark are breaking down from the party. Which, by the way, interesting. Some scenes that were at night, they have in the day, a day at night. I found those interesting changes.
Yeah.
And actually agreed with like the way they moved him in the novel. Actually makes more sense chronologically. So good on that. This is one of those scenes. This is taking place the night of after the thing they're breaking down. So beside her in the photo was the king, the young man she fallen in love with on the night of the senior prom. The quote royal couple, said Lana, gazing at herself and the boy who'd become her husband. Owing to the romantic atmosphere of that night of nights, the soft lights, the music, the streamers, the breaking balloons, one of which had broken in the back seat of the young man's car toward dawn in Lover's Lane.
Saucy.
Superman 3 novelization, everybody.
That's a good get. That's well spotted. I suppose as long as we're reading passages from that part of the book, this is the passage that I was like, see everybody, see what I'm talking about. I posted this on Twitter ages ago, where I was kind of like,
That was a very funny post, by the way. That I really enjoyed that. That was
I made a post on Twitter. It was like Warner Books to William Kotzwinkle. Hey, Pally, we need a novelization of Superman 3, but all we need is for you to adapt the script in book form, so don't put your heart and soul into it on anything. The movie's not very good. And then William Kotzwinkle, author of E.T. the Extraterrestrial, writes the following passage, right? In reference to Clark and Lana taking down the streamers after the high school reunion. Kent gave a fleeting private smile. The temptation was there as always to reveal himself, to float off the ground, to fly to the rafters, to lift the building, balance it on one finger, and then lay it at Lana's feet. Yes, he thought, I'm falling again. He must watch himself. It was astonishing the way a woman of Earth got inside you. Before you knew it, her mirror was in your mind, and the night became her face. Lana Lang was already there, her soft nature moving through him, making faint suggestions that seemed to come from a star, yet were actually dangerously near, close as the scent of her maddening perfume. She was glancing at him now, some mischief in her eyes. You never married? Kent shrugged. I came close. The folly of past intimacy with Lois Lane pricked his conscience now. He'd thrown his great strength away like an old suit, for the sake of one night's embrace, for the feeling of being just a man, not Superman. That was the law, that if he truly loved a mortal woman, he must forsake his cosmic power. Gladly had he forsaken it for Lois Lane, and the very next day a truck driver had beaten the living crap out of him. No, he must not let that happen again. But the music, that enchanting theme, again whispered to him, Earth Angel. Sorry, guys.
Wow, to be fair.
That's excellent.
Poetry.
You know, I'm in love with Lana Lang after reading that. And I, as you perfectly said, Alan, don't really care for the character in the film. I love Annette O'Toole. I think it's kind of a wish fulfillment sort of, you know, what every nerd in college, what every nerd in high school wishes his girlfriend was. I think that's what Lana is in that movie.
Well, we've mentioned it a couple of times now. Like I did a podcast with our friend Anthony Desiato from Digging for Krypton about this, and we talked about, look, obviously in the first two films, it's the message at the end of those is this version of Superman cannot be in a relationship with a human woman. Like,
correct.
It's not going to work. He has a higher calling, a higher happiness, as Jarrell describes it, right? And that's that. And of course, well, there's sequels. What do you do, right? So we get Lana Lang here, we get Lacey Warfield in the fourth one, right? So obviously there's all the reasons why you want to, you know, it's a movie, you want to keep a lot of interest going. The Lois Lane relationship had been played out at that point. I mean, they'd done everything there was to do with it as far as romantically goes. Or maybe not. There's lots of behind the scenes reasons Margot Kidder did not come back, obviously, for 3. It wasn't 4. All that to say, where I fall in it is, well, you know what? You live life, you get a little older, things that were absolutes for you aren't so absolute anymore. Maybe that's where Clark Kent is on this film, which, you know, and we'll get to Superman at the end, but I like how they wrestle with that as this passage you're talking about. I like how they wrestle with that question. So in
a way that they don't in the film. Like, it's actually given a little bit of time and thought in this. It's like, yes, this was the case, and he's actually grappling with it throughout. We'll get back into that, but Will we talk about Alan's favorite character, Mr. August Gorman?
Yeah, to be honest, again, I'll get into the yo-yo stuff, okay? But I thought, right, because I was getting to a point where I was like, if they mention a yo-yo on this fucking page,
explain what you mean by that.
So what he does in the book is it's never really explained in the film how Richard Pryor's character, how Gus Gorman can do the computer stuff.
Yes.
Okay. And we do have the scene, numerous scenes where he's playing with yo. He does it in the social welfare office. He does it in the elevator when he's going up to see Ross Webster. And what the author does is he uses that to kind of explain how his mind works, how the synapses almost in his mind work. Is that it? Like how and that's why he's so good with the yo-yo. So he can do all these tricks because it's basically the way that his synapses work in his mind, and they fire off, and he can make connections with things, like the technologies, the computers and stuff, the software. That's how he figures it out. He basically converts them into yo-yo tricks and whatever in his
strings,
head. Yeah, like the strings in his head, and that's how he figures it out. No issue with that. Thoroughly enjoyed that. But then everything throughout the entire book was brought back to the yo-yo, and even up to the last few pages, you know, he's golden yo-yo and all that kind of stuff. And I just thought it was excessive. I got it. the first time. I got it the second time and the third time. By time 15 or 16, I was like, okay, let's move on, let's move on from the. And I know you loved it, and I can see what he was doing, but I just thought he went way too far with it.
Yeah. What did you think, Zach?
Well, I think it's the author seeing the same problem we all did, seeing that there's no explanation for this guy's skill set. So let's latch on to anything we can in the film itself and then extrapolate from there. And I'm not going to say it was brilliant, but I was going to say it's pretty clever. It's like at least like, okay, his mind works this way with math. He doesn't even realize he's kind of an idiot savant, right? I think Ross Webster even calls him that at some point in the novel, if not the movie. But I mean, that's what he is, and that explains it. And I don't know, it works better here with that, and there's less just, you don't see the slapstick that Richard Pryor does.
Yeah.
You know, in the film, you don't see that in the novel, so you can just assume that that's how he comes up with these things, is able to do those things. And that's as good an explanation as any, because the film certainly does. The film literally says, I don't know, I just told it to do it, and it did. And we need more than that.
He's the Mary Sue of computers, basically.
That's what I was gonna, if I'm not mistaken, that exact scene isn't in the book, where he says, I don't know, I just did it. That's not in the book at all. There's a short backstory given about how he's always been kind of into technology, and he's always kind of had an understanding of it. I'm reading a piece here. Gus had built shortwave radios as a boy to monitor police progress in the neighborhood. His uncle brought home a stolen adding machine. Gus had taken it completely apart and put it back together again. When his father threw a saxophone through the TV screen, he'd been able to replace the tubes, and he wired his own snooping device that he used to listen to a call girl in the apartment below them. And this got the attention of a mob boss who hired him to do all this like wiretapping and all this. So like, it's only like a page and a bit, but like even that is a lot more satisfying than just Richard Pryor magically being a genius. You know?
Gus Gorman, I think, is always misaligned when it comes to Superman 3 and Superman in general. Like, he doesn't really belong. Richard Pryor doesn't belong in a Superman movie in this capacity. I think if he had been allowed to play a character straight, it could very well have worked. Yeah. But in this capacity, but what I found about the book was that even though he's still that character, his moments are less disruptive on the overall narrative.
That's a great way to put it.
In the book, in the film, he takes you out of it the whole time.
Yeah.
Now, saying that, I wish Kotzwinkle had kept certain things out. I just assumed that he'd keep out elements like Gus skiing off the roof, and that's still in there.
Well, I mean, it's not these. I mean, we say these novels are like director's cuts or whatever, but they're not. I mean, his objective is not to leave stuff out, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
So that's. I mean, the major things I can like, you have to kind of leave that in there because it's a set piece. The only reason that Ross Webster has a ski slope on the top of his building is for that stupid gag.
Do you know, I'm assuming this is unique to the novelization as well. He makes that make like a smidge more sense, because we find out that the maintenance guy or something has poured a hose all over the snow after Ross came off the slope.
Yeah, Vera Webster wanted Lorelai to that happen to her, and she was gonna ski next, but then Gus Gorman skis next instead. How he survives was nonsense.
Yeah, totally. But like, at least we know that, like, okay, it makes a little bit more sense why he would just go careening out of control. You know, just because surely the slope would be built in a way that.
See, filling plot. That's what novelizations are all about. Filling these plot holes, guys. I guess I think that there is a little bit of, as to my memory, more of an acknowledgement between Superman and Gus at the very end.
Yes,
where he's like, "I'm going to save you, Superman," and like they give a nod or something when he's saving him, more so than just the very end with the axe. So there's a little bit more of that. I see. He's different than the other three.
They kind of arrive at the same time in the cave, don't they? Which was different, because in the film, obviously Gus is up there already on the platform on the computer with Ross, Lorelai, and Vera. But in this, he comes in after Superman, I think, which I found. So the impression I got was they're almost kind of standing side by side at one point when he's like, "I'm not with these guys."
Yeah, you know, that was confusing to me too, because you're right. In the novels, he sees Superman get hit by these missiles, and then he follows him into the cave. But then, like, does he run up to the? In my head, I'm seeing it the way it is in the movie, where he runs up and is with the other three people. So I'm not sure, but no, there is more of a distinction made. Maybe that was part of the thinking by Kotzwinkle. Like, well, Superman sends the other three to jail, but not him. So maybe we need to soften him up a little bit at the end, because there is a little bit more. I mean, we see in the movie, right? He sees these fights going on at the gas station, and he's like, and there's like a shot where he seems like, oh, I kind of regret what I did. But in the book, they really play that out. You hear his inner thoughts, and so they're trying to soften him up a little bit, which is fair.
Yeah. I kind of have mixed feelings about this, because I think it kind of feeds into stereotypes maybe a little bit, but like the whole thing throughout, we get a little bit more of a sense of what Gus wants to spend his money on throughout the book. And he repeatedly refers to like alligator trousers and rhinoceros boots.
Yeah.
And like that imagery is brought up again and again, that he's wearing alligator trousers throughout all these like
kind of pimpish
scenes.
or...
Yeah, it is. It's totally like 70s pimp type stuff. And that is not in the movie at all. And like part of me wonders, was that Richard Pryor saying, no, guys, we're not doing that stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Or was that Kotzwinkle just adding it into the novel, you know? But like that imagery, and there's a bit, going back to your favorite bit, Alan, the yo-yos, like later on in the novel when kind of Ross gives in to his demands and builds the computer, it's implied that he also gave Gus a bunch of shares, and that Gus is now... you know, has...
Well, he outright says it when he's going down on the when he's going down on the donkey, when he's traveling down the mountain on the donkey, and he's like, you know, this is why I'm doing it. You know, I have how many shares in Websco Industries, and I'm going to go to Tijuana. Have you ever been to Tijuana, donkey? You know, it's like you can.
And he says a lot of female donkeys will look after you down there or something. Oh,
yeah.
But he refers to like having a yo-yo with rhinestones on it, and there's a bit where he like polishes his rhinoceros boots with the yo-yo because it has a little polish on it or something. It's problematic, but it was interesting imagery to think about. Just these extra little flourishes he put in, I thought.
Well, one more thing that had never occurred to me about Gus Gorman is, look, he does the scheme, he gets all the money in the movie. Why would you go back to work after that, right? Well, the novel, he explains like, yeah, well, I'm gonna go back in and get like my last paycheck, I guess. Like, I liked that. That's a problem I didn't even think existed, but it makes a lot of sense. And then of course that's when Ross Webster talks to him and all that. So that worked pretty well.
That reminds me actually that line that Ross Webster has. It's like, well, he'll probably lie low and won't draw any attention to himself. Unless, of course, he is a complete and utter moron. That's not in the book, unfortunately, because that's a great
line.
It's a great Robert Vaughn moment. And Robert Vaughn, by the way, like is great in this movie, and he's so quotable, and he's just like, let's be honest about this, he is kind of a poor man's Lex Luthor, and there's no getting around that. But I still love him, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, I think he's great. I mean, he is the post-crisis Lex Luthor, pre-crisis, which is interesting. I don't know. Obviously, John Byrne, he took a lot from the Kingpin from Marvel. He took a lot from Donald Trump, obviously. Now, did he take some from Superman 3 here? We'll never know. But I think he might have.
I would even go as far as to say he took a lot from Gene Hackman's portrayal in the first two movies, but that's the story for another day. Just briefly then on Ross, Vera, and Lorelai, because I don't think it's worth doing a full discussion on each one individually. But any kind of overall thoughts on them?
I wanna say a bit about this, right? So Ross, I like Ross Webster. I like the character. Like you said there, Zach, he's basically the post-crisis Lex Luthor. He's one-dimensional in the film. He's still one-dimensional in the book. It didn't really add anything to his backstory or anything. It kind of alludes to the fact that he might be more of a kind of a sadist in terms of how he treated Vera as kids. There's a lot of focus on how he used to like wire her up and stick light bulbs in her mouth and make her toenails glow and all this kind of stuff, right? So there was that, but I was hoping for a little bit more. He's not a very menacing villain in the film. I was hoping they'd make him a little bit more menacing in the book, and they didn't really do that. Lorelai, I've already mentioned, I thought was, again, underdeveloped. I was really looking forward to seeing a little bit more backstory to her. Kind of, you know, not necessarily where she came from, but why she's doing what she's doing. What her end goal is. Is it just to get shares in Websco Industries to retire or not?
They said that at least. The movie, you don't even have that.
No,
like
they don't.
Getting shares.
Yeah,
so
getting shares.
That's something.
Yeah, there's no, because, you know, and it's like, who is it in Lois and Clark? The very similar character, Mindy Church.
Oh man, Mindy Church, yeah.
Mindy Church is basically Lorelai and Lois and Clark. And
see, that's another thing. Clearly, they must have, even if we never know it, they must have based that character off her, right?
100%.
Yeah. And I would have just liked to have seen read a little bit more into her psyche and her kind of history or something like that. Vera again is she is what she is in the film. You do get a little bit more of an insight into her relationship with Ross. She's the older sister. He's kind of abusive to her. She's always looking for his approval. I did like, and this is one issue I didn't like with the book. I think he has an issue with women in the book. I mean, there's a lot of references to women in the book. Like, he refers to Vera numerous times as kind of being Stalin-esque looking. And I get it. It's funny, but there's a lot of comments about how ugly she is in the book, which I didn't really like. And you get it a lot in other, like, he calls Lorelai a dumb slut. He refers to her as a dumb slut in one passage. I didn't like that. He refers to that sweet old lady teacher that in Clark's high school as a demented or dementia-ridden. And then
that was one of my odds and ends here I had in my notes. Like why did we take it seemed like just sweet old lady from the Smallville high school, and he just goes in on this lady. Like, she's
didn't like that at all.
She is delusional, and she walked home with an imaginary person. She was talking to no one. I'm like, what did this lady do to you? If it's like they just tore down this poor woman who's just in the background to be a sweet old teacher Clark was talking to. I thought that was very unnecessary. I agree, Alan.
Yeah, and there was just a lot of that sprinkled throughout. Like I mentioned earlier, even that woman who for 1 second just hands Gus the Krypton, what are you going to use this for? She's described as being mental as well. So I just found it, but I thought it was kind of harsh on Vera. I didn't really like that about it.
I agree, and actually that is one of the other things I was coming up against when I was like, this would be great as an audiobook, and we'll do it, and it'd be fan made, and Alan will read a chapter, and I'll read a chapter, whatever. I was like, that's harsh, and and you're slagging the actress then as well as the character, and there's no need. And so I completely agree. What I would say though is, and maybe this is a great opportunity to segue onto the next character. I think that kind of works to set up the evil Superman stuff when it's from Clark's perspective. So when you're talking about the poor old high school teacher, and then there's another example of that in the parade scene, when Superman goes to Ricky's birthday and Smallville throws a big parade. And we get a description of the mayor as being kind of like a little bit shady, and he's doing this to deflect attention away from some of his recent dirty dealings and stuff like that. And then the writer even goes so far as to say that the marching band playing came second last in a competition recently. And then, and in addition to the keys of the city, Superman is also presented with a recipe, a cookbook of local recipes that had for generations given the men of Smallville gout and premature baldness. And it's just like that. Yeah, I kind of agree with both you guys in that, like, I can kind of see what he was doing. He was going for a little bit of a kind of a snarky angle to set up the fact that there is this dark side to Superman that he has to restrain himself from revealing. But he pushes it a bit far in places.
Yeah, because some of it's not even Superman's point of view. Some of it's just like the God's eye view narration, like in the beginning sequence of all the catastrophes going on. Like, there's referencing a perverted kid who steals photos from photo booths. I'm like, what? Like, this guy has a dark, cynical view of humanity.
But there's even when it comes to Clark, there's a good few times when he kind of insinuates or describes Clark as being a bit of a creep. I thought that was unusual as well. He's the hero of your story.
I think that, again, that's the time it was written. It's hard to say, but I do think, like, let's talk about Superman here, because I think there might be a few hot takes here. We'll start with you, Alan, because I know you tend to prefer a very traditional, upstanding, feel-good Superman, and this is a pretty dark depiction of Superman in a lot of ways. Not even just after he gets exposed to tar kryptonite, but even before that. Like, give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was looking forward to getting an insight into the mind of Christopher Reeve Superman, and we do get that, and I do like, say, when he's turning evil, it's really kind of this representation of inner turmoil and guilt within him, and all these kind of feelings he has, and I appreciated all that. And some of the inside his psyche kind of narrations and that, like, we spoke at length in about Batman Resurrection before, Rob, about how you didn't feel like that dialogue belonged to Michael Keaton's Batman, and there was a lot of that for me in this, where I was like, I'm not sure if that's really what we'll be going through. Well, I can't say, but my Christopher Reeve Superman, I don't really know if personally that's what I think he would be thinking. Like, I have one here where he had an internal monologue, and it was in relation to like how kind of studly he is and how all the women fancy him. And I was like, oh, he said something like, why is it always beautiful women that I fall for? Am I the bad guy? Am I the bad guy for toying with them when I know it can't go anywhere? Is it just to feed my ego?
It sounds like George Clooney Batman in that.
It does. I can't imagine that Christopher Reeve Superman thinking that or saying that. Now, to be fair, he doesn't say it. He thinks it to himself. But yeah, overall, we do get insights into him. I always think it's hard because when it comes to characters like this, you have it built up in your mind and built up in your head who they are. So when someone takes a stab at it and it's a little bit off center, you kind of, oh, okay. But I appreciate the effort that he made into doing that and going into his mind a little bit.
Okay, Zach?
Yeah, I could tell that they were setting up, the split between Superman and Clark, throughout the book, especially in the beginning. He's like questioning, like, why am I making a fool of myself? Why am I doing this? This is silly. Like, I don't even know why I do this. So, like, I appreciate that because then, in the film, there seems to be a very antagonistic relationship between Clark and Superman in that fight, and you're like, where did this come from? It comes out of nowhere. So he sees something in the film that's there, and then just extrapolates it and pads it out and makes it make sense. And there's a lot of that going on, and yet we so rarely get that because Christopher Reeve Superman rarely has people to talk to anyway, so we have no insight in the way he sees the world. I just go back to Superman 2 when he's talking to Lois in the fortress. He's like, oh, I kind of like making a fool of myself sometimes, and that's kind of my read on this Superman. Like, he's enjoying having a good time and as Clark Kent. So I never really got that in any of the films, but you know what, that in this particular story, right, this is what's on his mind. You know what, even the best people have bad days and they have their thoughts, and we're not gonna convict him of thought crime here. So so you know what, he had some straight thought. I don't know, like that. It's such a people say Superman's not relatable, so I don't want to say it makes him more relatable, but I don't know. It kind of, there is a shade to that where it's like he's just a guy talking to people, and him grappling with, I can't be in a relationship with anybody, but I like her, and I like, those are fair thoughts to have, I think, and I'm glad the book engaged with them because clearly there's something going on between Clark and Lana. Now at the end, they do establish, like they really kind of establish, okay, well, I'm going to set her up with a nice job in Metropolis, and obviously we can't go any further than this, and I don't want to lead her on or anything like that. So, as much as I like the Clark and Lana relationship in this movie and in this movie series, like, I'm glad that they define that. Because in one of my questions and comments about Superman 3 is like, did he just propose to her at the end? Like, the movie doesn't really it leads you to believe that truly. So I'm glad they spent some time engaging with that stuff.
He even says in that scene, he's like, I hope in the book he says, hopefully eventually she'll find someone else, and I appreciated that a lot. And it reminded me, Rob, we read last year, the year before, Superman Up in the Sky, and there's a story in that book where you've got the Kryptonian Superman and the human Clark Kent and the persona, and they're engaging and they're talking to each other. And that really reminded me of that kind of insight into what was actually going on in that film. It's the Kryptonian, the darkness of Krypton versus, the sun of Krypton, basically, coming together.
If we ever have
no part of that I didn't love.
If we ever have Tom King on this show, I'm going to sit him down. I'm going to say, Tom King, have you read Superman 3, a novel by William Cotswinkle, author of E.T. the Extraterrestrial? Because I bet you have. And I want to talk about the evil Superman stuff in a sec because, man, it's so good. But
it is.
Yeah, no, just to piggyback on something you said, Zach. I really like the sort of frustrated Clark at the start of this story. And while the novel doesn't really underline it, it does address that he would be a little bit frustrated at this point because he just had to make this great sacrifice. He had to let go of, his great love. Again, it is not something that is like much time is spent on, but it is at least addressed in the book that this happened and that he had to make this sacrifice and that he doesn't have this. So, of course, like if there was any, sliver of frustration in him about the Clark Kent situation and that he has to act like a fool and stuff like that, of course that would be a little bit, elevated and expanded at this point, So I thought that followed on really nicely. And throughout the book, him being just a little bit more frustrated and a little bit more kind of hard edged about certain things. It just felt kind of right. And what I love about it is not only did it feel kind of right, it also highlights why this version of Superman is out of date now. And I'm glad we've moved away from it. Where nowadays, in our modern versions of Superman, either the Kents are alive or Lois is there and she knows the secret, or there's usually someone in the ether that he can talk to. Whereas in these older versions of Superman, he's always alone, he's always frustrated, he's always like a Catholic priest of a hero, where he this vow of celibacy, and it's just this miserable concept, really. And it's the same with like Anakin Skywalker or whatever. It never ends well, those types of stories, So I think it's an interesting timestamp in that sense, and it's one of the most, I would say, one of the most interesting explorations of why that's an issue and why he should have that sort of outlet. So I've really no major issue other than the kind of problematic stuff you mentioned, Alan, him thinking he's a stud, stuff like that.
Well, he is a stud, to be fair.
Some of that is a little bit tricky dicky, but it never goes too far, that kind of way. At least as far as Superman's concerned. Some of the other characters I think go too far, but I think as far as Superman's concerned, I think I'm pleased enough with the more cynical, harder edged, darker Superman we see in this story. And that leads me on to evil Superman. And I want to throw it to our good friend Zach Moore. You have spent years and years of your life talking about Clark Kent getting exposed to rocks and turning evil, or having his inhibitions released, or whatever you want to call it. Take it away. What did you think of evil Superman?
Well, it's just aesthetically, right? They make some changes here.
Yes.
When he gets exposed to this kryptonite, there's an actual visual, like there's a glow in his eye. Even Lana comments, his blue eyes look green now. Like there was some, which is like, okay, cool. Like that is a little different than him just like in the movie. He just gets it and looks at it. It's like, oh, well, this is very nice. Thank you. And then he later on he finally feels something better. I like how there was that initial jolt when he first gets exposed to it, and then it goes on. And then very interesting to me, his costume, like it like starts to go green and then dark and glow. Like that's interesting. I don't know if I like that better or worse. I really like what they did with the evil Superman costume in the movie. Blows my mind that they thought to do that when they're like on a budget and they're like, let's just make a brand new Superman costume. Like, okay, now is that the suit getting darker the way he's getting corrupted? Is it getting dirty? I don't know. I think it's interesting that we don't know, and I like how it's something to talk about. But visually, I think it's interesting that I don't know if that was maybe something in the script they had initially thought of and thought, oh, that's too expensive, let's just give him a darker costume, or is that something William Kotzwinkle came up with himself? I don't know. I find that interesting, though, that they went as far as they did, because at the end they're talking about how it's like a dark, basically a black costume he's fighting, because it's truly the dark.
The color of a vampire is the way he describes it.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's very interesting. Now, as far as his behavior goes, like they sprinkle in a couple other random things, like he tap dances and makes an earthquake, and that sort of thing. But it's mainly all the same things we saw in the film. Obviously, the junkyard fight to me is like the highlight of the movie. Is it the best fight of the Christopher Reeve series? I don't know, probably is. Honestly, I don't know. Obviously, it's that or Superman 2. There's really those are the two options there. But I really do enjoy it, and I was looking for some more depth in that, and we got it, because they set up this kind of frustration, and this is this physical manifestation of a lot of the things they had set up in the novel. So I thought that was really well handled. I mean, I wish there was more, much like in the film. I just wish there was more of it, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Alan, what are your thoughts? You've touched on it a little bit, but tell me a little bit more about evil Superman in this.
I agree with everything Zach said. I am glad that we have the version we have in the film. I love that costume, that dirty kind of almost Superman Returns kind of wine-ish kind of cape and stuff. Growing up as a kid, I always just presumed he wasn't taking care of it, he wasn't cleaning it, he wasn't shaving, he wasn't, and it was getting dirty. Obviously, as an adult, I put more into that, and it's literally turning evil with him. It's darkening. It's the visualization of his soul, becoming corrupted. And I love all that in the film. In the book, I prefer what they did. I prefer like that, the green eyes. I prefer the idea of the the costume is like you said, vampire-esque. It's becoming black with the hatred and the stain of his, his anger and his agitation and everything else. My own thoughts about Superman, evil Superman in Superman 3, is that he's not really evil Superman. He's more like mischievous, pain in the ass Superman.
Pesky Superman, yeah.
Pesky Superman. And I can understand that. Look, it was the 80s and it was for kids and stuff. I would have liked to have seen it delved into a little bit more of, you know, not just evil Superman shenanigans, but like an actual threat to humanity.
The world's reaction to him more so than
that kind of stuff.
That's a fair. He could have actually put that in the book. In fairness, yeah.
But other than that, I'm really happy with it. The junkyard fight, I'm really glad. I love it in film. I didn't want to read 20, 30 pages about, you know, Superman throws a tire, Superman throws a wrench, all that kind of stuff. But saying that, I found the end of the fight very interesting because that's completely different, and I really wanted to get your take on that, Rob, to be honest with you.
I love it so much, and I'd forgotten how different it was up until I finished the book last night in the bath at 1 o'clock in the morning.
That is how much Rob loves this novel.
Holy heck. And you know, I read it 6 months ago and somehow I'd forgotten it again, but it is so different, and I'll get into it in a second. But yeah, just overall, I completely agree with you guys. I love the costume. I think we mentioned in our that wonderful episode we did years ago, Alan, about our most cherished Superman memorabilia kind of items in our collection thing. I mentioned the Superman 3 novelization. I hadn't read it since I was a kid at that point, and the reason I hadn't read it was because my copy was so battered and broken that I didn't want to risk opening it and the pages falling out. So the way I've read it this time is you can find PDFs of it on some of the various archive sites online and stuff like that. So that's how I read it this time. And I remember, he's holding up
pages falling out here.
I remember that's one of the main things I remember as a kid reading the book. The two things I remember were the yo-yos, the constant mention of yo-yos, and that being the explanation for the architecture of Gus Gorman's mind. And the other thing I distinctly remember as a kid was how his costume would slowly turn green and then ultimately turn black, like the garb of a vampire. I remember just that description really stuck with me. And yeah, to both of your points, it is still pesky Superman. He's just doing pesky. He's just being a bit of a rapscallion, a bit of a rascal. But when you get to that junkyard fight, it's such an internal battle, and it's really underlined that this is a battle happening within his soul. And to your point, Alan, yes, it's not just and then he threw a tire over a thing or whatever. That's in there. Like, he follows the script for the most part, but like, you really get the point that at this point he is an evil Superman. He wants to kill this other part of him. Yeah. You know, that it's not just that he's the good side of Superman. He's like the light side of Krypton. And the way Kotzwinkle describes evil Superman is like he's all the raw fury of Krypton having destroyed itself or something like that. He comes up with all this kind of speculative stuff about Krypton's spirit and Krypton's soul, and that Superman is no longer even an individual at all. He's like the warring. I'm trying to think. He describes him, but he's like Clark Kent. I'm actually going to pull it up. Sorry, guys, 1 second.
Sure.
Yeah.
Clark Kent, Superman. These are just names for the raw kinetic energy of Krypton, a planetary power at war with itself, that it could divide into equal halves like night and day, was only one of its brilliant possibilities. It could as well destroy itself. And it reminded me, do you know what it reminded me of, Alan? Do you remember when we were talking to Martin Lakin, the great Martin Lakin? We had him on to talk about Supergirl. And we were throwing around like crazy theories about some of the bonkers Krypton science in these movies. And you and I have talked about it as well, Zach, that like the whole Krypton space fantasy in these movies is very speculative, and they never really say exactly what's going on. Some of it is kind of just magic and craziness, and we're not really sure. Martin said this really weird thing that's always stuck with me ever since, that like Clark Kent and Superman actually are two different beings occupying the same space, and they're like shifting between dimensions, and it's not as simple as glasses coming off. It's like they actually are two different beings that share. And like reading this, I'm like, is that where Martin got this from? It's all bananas, it's all crazy, but there's so much of that. There's so much of that in this where he's just really getting to the meat of the emotion of that fight, rather than just, you know, Superman being punched into stuff, you know?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of internal stuff going on here, obviously, but these are two physical beings fighting, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it says it that
I don't know, man.
the
Well,
Clark
see, that's
Kent-
why I asked the question. See, because Alan's like, absolutely, and Rob's
Yeah, well,
like, I
see,
don't know.
what it describes it in the book as when something strange begins to happen, Clark leaves. He's kind of this. It leaves the Superman's body. He's kind of this ethereal being, and then what seems to happen, and I think it says it in the book, is that he suddenly is a full person in his own right with the same weight as Superman. So much
I'm
so,
no
and-
hallucination. said
no,
Clark
I'm
Kent.
no hallucination, and it even describes how evil Superman, his power has been reduced through the
Yeah.
loss of the Clark Kent.
Mhm.
Like they're both half of Superman.
That could
So they're
still
two
just be a
physical halves.
manifestation, though.
it could. But he says he's not a hallucination, so I'm going to take
Yeah.
his word at it.
Yeah.
It's ambiguous, and that's
Yeah.
interesting. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I
Exactly.
find it interesting that we still don't know. Even in this black and white, in print here, we still don't know. I kind of see it as like, famous Star Trek episode, The Enemy Within, where Captain Kirk gets split into good and bad side. Those are
Yeah.
two physical. They're physical manifestations of that. So, and then they get merged back together, and then that's what this, the beautiful ending of this confrontation is like. They kind of merge back together, which is, I guess not as viscerally satisfying as seeing good Superman just strangle evil Superman to death like he does in the film. But
Not only that though, and it's not, and this is another thing the book does. We talk about Jor-El, which is something that never happens after the Superman the movie.
Right.
Unless we're talking about the Donner cut, which we've a whole other episode about that, and it's great. There's this bit where he goes, he called upon his aged father, the departed spirit who guided him through good and evil many times. Was that spirit near? Can one planet call another, or memory speak? Kent saw, instead of a burning graveyard, a single candle flame burning in himself. And it's that this is totally the novel. There's no way this is in the script. It's all completely internal, and he's like calling upon Jor-El, and the flame is there, and then the flame goes out, and it disappears in a wisp of smoke, and then it reappears again, and it's like him and evil Superman are immersed in this flame, and then evil Superman, the black suited evil Superman, just like slumps down in Clark's arms, and they embrace as brothers, and they become one again. It's just beautiful. It's so like, and it's the kind of thing you'd only get in a novel. You couldn't.
Yes.
I don't know how you do that, like in live action.
Well, don't forget that Lois and Clark scene where he flew clone Superman into the sun. That's pretty much the same thing.
Absolutely. And there's another. So after the junkyard fight, we get back to the ultimate computer, and I don't know about how you guys feel about this whole section, but for me, we're kind of back to just here's
by
the
the numbers.
script.
Yeah.
It's by the
Yeah.
numbers for the most part, but there is this lovely piece just when it's either when he's flying back to the chemical plant or flying back with the acid. There's just this lovely line that really stuck with me when I read it before, where he says he was himself again, working for humanity, its guardian angel and friend. He'd lost his grip a while back and played the drunken fool, a vile interlude, but at least he now knew he was not the goody-good everyone thought he was. He too cast a shadow, deeper than most, a shadow filled with cruel intent. He must live with this knowledge and show mercy when human selfishness came his way.
Had to come
Character
from
arc.
somewhere, Clark.
Character
that?
arc.
Yeah, because now he can empathize with people who have gone. He's like, well, I've done bad things too. They deserve a second chance. I deserve a second chance. So that was interesting. They didn't need to add that, and they obviously that's not from the script.
No, there's no way that's in the script.
No, that was very interesting to have that introspective moment. That stuck out to me too, Rob.
Yeah, no, it just and in fact, when you and Anthony were talking about like, does he even learn anything from any of this? I was like, yes, he does. You got to read it. And I will say this as a fan of novelizations, I don't appreciate when people try to prop up a bad film by saying, oh no, you got to read the novelization. It's like, no, the film is the film, and if the film fails, then the film has failed. But it is the perfect example of how a novelization can elevate the text, and I think that's definitely what's happening.
Can I ask you both a question? There was a section in the book that I just didn't really understand, and maybe you got more of it than I did. What was with the transfer of power or strength to Ricky in the cornfield?
Oh, that's a great question. Zach, do you want to answer that one?
This Superman has a lot of weird powers, y'all, and for real, and that's why I think he's split into two people at the end because he's doing wacky stuff like that. So I believe it because in this, as we've mentioned many times now over many podcasts, probably the science fantasy of this. Okay, sure, like this particular version of Superman, I'm fine with that kind of nonsense, because of the way it's presented. Most other ones I like hard rules and sci-fi and like, well, here are his 7 powers and he can't do anything other than that. But it's fine, sure.
But what's the purpose of it? Like, is he literally getting powers, or is he just kind of rejuvenating him after he was injured? What do you think, Rob?
Okay, so I have 2 thoughts, right? My first thought is this. I think that was just a little bit of hero worship. He was just so happy to be in the presence of Superman that he had this rush of energy and he felt stronger. I think that's what the writer was actually getting at.
Okay.
But I think as a really strange 35-year-old super fan of these incredibly strange films from 45 years ago, I think exactly what you guys think. I think that Superman was, in fact, passing on powers
some
to
life
him
force, yeah.
Because fellows and girls, that's a thing Superman can do in these movies. You see him do it in Superman 4 when he's like gently lowering the woman from the Great Wall of China. He's like his hand is pressed to her back, and it almost looked like she's flying. But most importantly, you see it in the deleted scene of the Superman and Lois flight in Superman 4, where Lois starts flying herself.
There it is.
Yeah.
And like,
See, I always find it strange that when these are referred to as deleted scenes, because they weren't deleted scenes in the version that I grew up with. Like, that's in the entire film, like
what?
where he drops Lois and she flies.
No. There in the theatrical cut, there is a brief bit where he says, "Off you go," and she kind of briefly fly. And fair enough, yeah, okay. So that's briefly in the theatrical cut. In the deleted scene, man, there's a whole like,
and he just kind of flicks his arm at her, right?
Yeah, like it in the theatrical cut, you could almost see it as just like momentum, like maybe she's just riding on a wind tunnel or something like that. But in the deleted scene, there's this, in my opinion, beautiful scene of Margot Kidder like actually flying like Christopher Reeve and doing loop-de-loops and like banking around in the sky and like smiling, and it's I think it's great.
Wow.
And it's totally bizarre and it makes no sense, but it just continues on the Peter Pan sort of.
I must have forgotten that. I'll have to check that out again, because I thought it was like how people refer to the Christopher Reeve's daughter in the tornado scene. Like that was on the VHS. That was part of the movie when I grew up. Like that was in the film.
Alan, I think it was actually Zach who introduced me. That there is a fan edit of Superman 4 called "The Quest for Coherence," where they put everything back in, like everything available, they put back in to the point where even the Metro Club scene, which we've never seen, we've seen screen grabs and all that. They used the comic book adaptation to fill in the gaps for that bit,
and the soundtrack, from there.
And it's great. It's my favorite cut of the film now because
my good friend made that, actually. So I know the guy who made that. Yeah. So yeah, I have the Superman 4 novelization as well. So I've scanned some comic book images for him to use, and I think he's gonna update it for HD. He's talking about it. So
great. Yeah.
The guys ever want to talk to him about it, I'm sure he'd love to talk to you guys about it.
I have the original Superman 4 VHS that I used to rent from the video store as a kid here in my hand. And like that's because I found it crazy when I found out that entire scene of the tornado just wasn't in subsequent films or in the YouTube download. Because I remember even saying to my daughter, "Oh, he's going to save a little girl from her tornado," and then it just didn't happen. But it's still here, thank God.
Is that your thing, Alan? Do you go to the video store and get all the tapes that you watched?
No, I was working in the video store. So what happened was when I had worked there for a while.
I just know you've done this more than once, right?
I'd left and I got word that the video store was shutting down, and I was home for a weekend. And I ran down and I was like, I need some Superman tapes, the tapes that I always rented, and Superman 1 and 2 were gone, but 3 and 4 were still there. So I have the original 3 and 4 VHSs that I used to rent as a kid. I have 3s under the desk there as well. But yeah.
So circling back to Superman 3, any thoughts on Cyborg Vera, by the way? Because we didn't mention her at all.
Yeah, they do it a little bit differently with her. Like, she's like more part of the computer, and then of course they tie into like Ross having kind of tortured her earlier in their childhood, where she used to like put a light bulb in her mouth and all that stuff. So, and they're always like, "Oh, she didn't know what love is, so maybe she thought this was love." I'm like, that's interesting. Like, I thought they could have done more. Again, they thought they could have done more with her, but at this point, they're wrapping it up. They're like, okay, script, novel, done. There's no really extrapolation beyond that.
I thought I like, as someone who has never really understood this huge childhood fear people have of Cyborg Vera, that there is a line where they describe that there's like circuitry under her skin, and I was like, oh, that's kind of gross. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Well, it was like body horror in the 80s. Yeah, it was the grey eyeballs, and like, don't get me wrong, she's no ET. But
yeah, I was going to say, who's worse, Cyborg Vera or ET?
Yeah. Cyborg Vera was legitimately scary as a kid.
I have 3 odds and ends that we haven't brought up. I have, so I thought it was very interesting. Just want to point this out, that as sexual as this book gets, and you guys don't, you'll not appreciate how sexually charged this book is until you read it for yourself. Talking about legs and all sorts of things for everybody, right? But when we get to the actual, sex scene between Superman and Lorelei, they just brush over it. Totally. I was like, now's your chance to really go all in. I was surprised because by the time
you were waiting with bated breath.
I've been reading, 2/3 of this book of all this, stuff, all these euphemisms and references, and it was just like, and then they went to the bed, and I'm like, that's it.
I think he actually describes like the curtains or something fluttering in the wind or something.
Then to talk about the mean-spiritedness of it all, the Tower of Pisa guy, right? He's like, oh, my family needs this money, and there's someone's in the hospital or something. I hope I can sell all these towers of Pisa. And then Superman straightens it out, and he's like, oh my God, all my stuff is useless now. I need to get new stuff. So then we wrap back around the end, and apparently he borrowed a bunch of money from the mob to make new versions. And then Superman makes the Tower of Pisa lean again, so those are useless. I've never liked that in the movie. Like, I thought it was kind of dumb and mean-spirited and silly anyway. But I especially don't like it here where they just make you feel worse for the guy. Because now, like, his family needs money. He owes the mob money. I don't know. I just didn't like that at all. That is what it was, I guess.
I agree.
That is fair. Yeah,
that is very fair.
Superman, I don't know, went to the mill where they make the cement for those things, and he made a bunch of them for the guy, and he gave them to him for.
Yeah, I mean, if he's gonna pay back the shop owner in Superman 2, he needs to, Oh, I did like how he like apologized to the people on the oil tanker. He's like, "Sorry about that, sir." And I don't think he did that in the film. I think he just flew off. My last point is, I was always curious about the timeline of this film, because like he goes to this high school reunion. But also Gus Gorman gets the job and gets a paycheck, and they build a computer. I'm like, what is the time? And I like it when films don't establish hard timelines, because look at the Star Wars sequel trilogy. If you want problems that come from establishing hard timelines for like, this happened in 16 hours, that's it. Everything you saw, there's no room for speculation or comic book stories to fill in or novelizations to expand. The Superman 1, I don't know. How long was that? I like to think a lot of time took place in that, and Superman and Lois had more time together. I don't know. I'm just saying that it's vague there, right? This film, it is established that it takes place over the course of a month.
Oh, okay.
At the end, because Superman says, when I was here a month ago for that chemical fire,
I missed that. Again. He does. Yeah, he does say that, yeah.
I'm like, look at that. We have established a time, and I think that actually works. Now, I don't know why Clark was working on this one story for a month for the Daily Planet, but other than that. So I thought that was an interesting note.
I could feel that just on the topic of the story, like when we see Lois congratulating Clark about his great story about the high school reunion, like William Kotzwinkle actually says that like she had a snide look on her face.
Yeah.
Oh, it was supposed to be sarcastic. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because what the hell? Like, that's not a story that a major like, it's a column maybe, but it's not a story that, like, this is a guy who was writing investigative journalism about the textile plant or something. That was the one in Superman the movie. So, great job on that textile scandal, Kent, or something. And then in the Donner cut, he's writing a series on city council or something. This is not the guy you get to go to his high school reunion and kind of wax lyrical.
Well, even the setup for it is like, hey, Kent here has been invited to his high school reunion. I'm like, and that's news? You mentioned Lois. I have one last thing. Sorry, I didn't mention it. So there's this random like paragraph where it's like, Lois got out of her car at the airport and 2 men approached her. Excuse me, Miss Lane. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Are we going to get, because I'm thinking they expand things in novels. Yeah. Are we going to get a Lois subplot in Superman 3, the novelization? We did not. But I was hopeful there for a second that we would see what she was doing this whole time, because she ends up on her own adventure. She comes back with a story at the end, and I thought we might get to see that story. Obviously, Margaret Kidder didn't want to come back after what happened to Richard Donner, and she had her issues with the Salkinds and all that. Lots of reasons why Lois wasn't in the film proper. I thought that would have been a cool way to incorporate her more in this novel, and I thought that was the setup. And then we just find out, oh no, that was just one extra random paragraph. They might as well have left that out, in my opinion, because it didn't really go to anything greater.
I thought it was kind of a fun little I thought it was nice.
I like that. I like that idea, though. I like maybe at the end of every few chapters, you just get a paragraph about Lois's story in Mexico or the Bahamas, wherever she was. Yeah, I like that.
That's what I was thinking might happen after they set it up, but nope, we don't see her until the very last scene again, like we do in the film. So fair enough, but.
I wonder was that something that might have even been trimmed out in the edit of this book? That's an interesting thought. When we have William Coswinkle on the show,
yeah.
Well, was that ever going to be more in the book? Yeah, interesting. I have one note here. Just I don't think this is a line in the movie, but it's a great line. It's a great villain line, and I can almost hear Gene Hackman saying it, who obviously wasn't in this movie. When Superman arrives at the ultimate computer or whatever, Ross Webster says, "Welcome to the wonderful world of computers, Superman. How do you like my machine?" I just think it's just a great Bond villain line. Like I can picture, I wonder why they didn't put that in there. It could have been great. Any final thoughts, Alan?
Yeah, no, not particularly. Look, I have to say, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really did. I enjoyed what they did with it. I thought I still think it suffered with a lot of the issues that the film had. I think there was an over concentration on the comedic elements, and that could have been trimmed down a lot. Like we spoke about how he trimmed down the action sequences quite a bit to its benefit. I think he could have done the same with like the slapstick at the start and a lot of the humor throughout. But no, I have to say I really did enjoy it, and I would recommend it to any fan of the film. I think it's well worth checking out.
Any last lingering thoughts on Superman 3 by William Coswinkle, author of E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Zach?
This was a delight to read. It was an experience. I have a great affinity for the Christopher Reeve Superman films. If you don't, I don't know if you would enjoy this, honestly. But if you do, you absolutely will enjoy it just for the curiosity factor of it all, because this is more time in this world, just in a different format. And that's what we're looking for. And that's why we like stuff like, to various degrees, the Superman 78 comics. We just like being able to exist more in that world. And this is tie-in media that came out at the time. It's such a different thing than like, oh, hey, check out Superman 78 Volume 2. And and that's all great. But that stuff, 40 years later in retrospect, to me, it's so interesting to get this tie-in media that came out when the film came out, because there's such a different flavor of that and all these intellectual properties. And so it's such a cool, fascinating oddity. And as I found out through this discussion, this is the only one, because Superman 4 has a junior novelization, which I will now try to seek out and find for myself.
Yeah, and I do want to read that, and I hope I'm not doing it a disservice. Maybe it is just as in-depth as this, but I did kind of skim through it, and I kind of got the sense that it was a little bit more kind of to the letter in terms of the script, which is no harm as far as I'm concerned, because that is a full story that more people need to be exposed to. But I suppose finally, just for me, like I will absolutely acknowledge this is no masterpiece. There's a lot of flaws to it, but Alan, you made this point when we did our RoboCop episode, and we were talking about the RoboCop remake in 2014. You made this point where you said, don't remake good films, remake bad films and make them better. I would make the case that this is in fact a bad film that has been made ever so slightly better in this book. And for that reason only, I would say check it out. I think there's a more substantial character arc in here. I think there's some really beautiful, lyrical, poetic prose that is put to just the imagery of Superman as this godlike being. And it's something I've never really come across. I've never really seen Superman written as beautiful as it is in some of the passages in this. So for all of those reasons, I would recommend this book. I wanted to ask you guys before we go, you mentioned, Zach, there that this kind of is a one and done, that there isn't novels like this, certainly not for 1 and 2, and debatably for 4. Would you like to have read William Coswinkle novelizations for all 4 movies? And what would you have? We won't go too in depth into this, but like, are there key things that you would kind of cover up or address or anything like that in novelizations the way this does?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would read all four of them if they existed for sure. I mean, I would like more. Just I guess it's just the insight into the way Superman and Clark thinks. You know, I mean that's something we don't. That's a thing about a comic book, right? We have that narration that can go on forever, and we don't have them in a film, right? So that I would that, and then more fleshing out of probably like the Daily Planet staff, which not that this book did that, but it would be nice if there was just more content there. And that's the kind of stuff I'd be looking for in those films. And then to have more of a narrative through line of, obviously this book picks up the threads of like Jor-El and the events of the last movie. And even though, him and Lois aren't together here, his failed relationship with her is on his mind. And there's a reason why this and that. And so like connecting the dots, right? I mean, we talked about off the top, that's what those Batman movie novelizations do, especially Batman Forever. It kind of weaves in and makes you feel like this is a cohesive franchise, even though they're all very much not a cohesive franchise. So those kind of connective tissues are the stuff I'd be looking for, and plus more in-depth characterization. Maybe some more Lex Luthor backstory might be fun, right? And right?
Yeah, 100%. And just to that point, I think there was a prop auction recently where there was one of those Daily Planet things was going. Daily Planet props was up for auction. There's a whole backstory for Lex Luthor in one of those. And it's like
Really?
written, and it talks about all the other crimes he did prior to the movie, and like it's pretty airy fairy. There's not much to it, but like it's something, you know.
Yeah.
What about you, Alan?
I didn't buy this book. I was gifted this book by my good friend Rob O'Connor, who posted it to me about 2-3 years ago, I'd say at this point, and just wanted to share his love for it with me. And that's why I asked at the start, why was there ones for the other films? Because I would absolutely get them and read them, not just to finish the collection of them, but to genuinely have an insight into those characters from those movies. Like from the first film, I would have been interested to see, where Clark Kent's mind was at after the death of Jonathan, leaving Smallville for the first time, saying goodbye to Martha Kent, maybe a section about his journey up north. I would have been very interested in that. In Superman 2, I would have been interested to see where his mind was at, after he was beaten up in that cafeteria, and what emotions and stuff he was going through. And again, on that journey back up north,
Second eggs, Annie. Sorry,
what was
sorry,
going
Alan.
through, what was going through his head, and possibly his feelings of letting Earth down, of letting Krypton down, all that stuff. But mostly the end of Superman 2, that entire section with Lois Lane, and why they can't really be together, because I don't think that's very clearly explained in the end of Superman 2. It's just, why can't they be together if he has powers? Is it a biological thing? Is it just that his calling is greater, and like that he can't focus on one person? I would have liked, I would definitely like to read a book that dives into all that. So yeah, 100%. I would absolutely read the books novelizations for the rest of the films.
Yeah, I think well, I'm obviously there with you. I'd love all four of them to have. I think definitely Superman the movie is a pretty finished film for me. I think that the stuff with the time travel at the end could do with a bit of elaboration. And as you
That
said,
would be
Zach,
interesting to see how they would articulate that, huh?
I would love to see them articulate that and actually just expand on like this rule: it is forbidden for you to interfere with human history. What does that mean? What are the consequences? We never hear any more of that in that film, and it's probably the biggest flaw I have. And there's no consequence really. I'd love to see a writer really just elaborate on that a little bit, even just within the confines of the finished film. Backstory for Lex Luthor would be lovely. That's all fine. Same thing with Superman 4. Just iron out the kinks a little bit. Just explain things a bit more. My God in heaven, though, Superman 2 is in dire need of a novelization. I just think you could fix all this talk about the ultimate cut and all this kind of stuff we've spent years talking about. I don't think that's ever really going to happen in a way that'll please everyone, because you're always going to be.
It's already happened, Rob. It's happened on
Oh
All
yeah,
Star Superfan podcast.
yeah, like 100%. And like there are, but anything anyone does to fix that film will always be patchwork from now on, because you're going to be taking modern effects and
Yeah.
covering up seams and trying to paste things together that just don't go together and things like that. Whereas I think a novelization, just a complete blank slate, you take the best parts of both versions of the film and just iron it all back together and make it make sense and give us some kind of explanation for the crazy Richard Lester Powers and that lovely scene at the end with Lois. I think they do explain why they can't be together. I think that is explained pretty well, but just to think that the Clark and Lana scenes in this, and how beautifully written they are. To think that we could have a book like that, but for Superman and Lois and those scenes in Superman 2, I would love to read something like that. I would really, really, and I might write it myself. That kind of way.
How would you end it, Rob? Would you keep the memory kiss?
I would, yeah, because of that scene between Lois and Superman at the end where she's describing, being married to a doctor and all that. I think it's such a tragedy losing that. I think it's a great scene for Margot Kidder. She's the unsung hero of all these films, and every fix everyone seems to have for that film is losing that scene, and I think it's lovely. I would just make more sense of the magic kiss, or maybe I think it was you who said it in the episode. Maybe we just have that scene and they kiss, and then we never really hear that she's lost her memories. We just kind of end on that, Yeah. Maybe that's the way to do it. I don't know, but I would love a Superman, a really thorough Superman 2 novelization. I think would be lovely, and just. You could do all the nerdy shit I'm always talking about. Just explain the crazy Krypton space fantasy science a bit more. I'd love that. A bit more, nuance to General Zod, who's a very one-dimensional character in that film. I'd love a little bit more of that.
Get some Jor-El Zod backstory in there.
Oh man, like there's so much you could do. And on that note,
prologue of Zod's insurrection. That's the prologue of the novel. There it is.
I knew I'm an important voice in the New Order. On that note, Batman Resurrection, we've mentioned a couple of times, a fine book. We some flaws, but generally speaking, very, very good. I did speak to the author briefly on Twitter, and I said to him at one stage, I was like, would you ever think of doing a Superman book set in the Donnerverse? And he replied, the future is always in motion.
I would love it. I mean, it's, I don't know how big of a fan he is of that. Obviously, he's a big Star Wars fan. He's written some great Star Wars novels. I've read a couple of his John Jackson Miller. A couple of Star Wars novels are pretty great. Resurrection was great. I would love to see him get his hands on this. And the great thing about the Christopher Reeve movies is, like, they exist, and you can put a movie in between, and you don't have to worry about actors, because it's like, wait, does Batman Resurrection, is it going to lead to Batman Forever? I don't care. It doesn't matter. Let's not talk about that. With the Christopher Reeve movies, it's all one thing, and you don't worry about which cut of two or whatever, but just tell a story in between the movies, after the movies. Like, there's so much potential in that universe. So, and that's why Superman 78 is so of interest to us, and we've enjoyed it to different degrees, but it's a very interest to us because, let's see him fight a Metallo or Brainiac or all these villains we've never seen him fight before. So I would be first in line for that if they did the Superman.
I would be more excited about that than any more Batman stuff.
Oh yeah,
as much as I love the Batman Resurrection book.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree with that. I'd be first in line for that. As we've spoken before, I'm not a huge fan of the Superman 78. I preferred the second run over the first run with the Metallo. But again, it is what it is. I would love to read a full book set in this universe.
Very cool. So, Zach, anything you want to plug before we go tonight?
Well, just always on to Smallville. As of this recording, we are in season 10, the final season of our episode by episode coverage. Obviously, speaking of novels, there are actually quite a few Smallville novels which I have my eye on to cover. And I got to tell you guys, covering a novel, a little more work than covering a 45-minute TV show. But no, I do have plans to actually cover those Smallville novels. And there's like young adult novels, and there's novels. So there's 2 short series of novels. So look ahead to those, guys, if you liked us talking about a novel. Now, speaking of a novelization, Rob, as you were talking about the difference, there is a novelization of the pilot of Smallville. It's actually called Arrival, which they made that before there was a season 5 episode of Smallville called Arrival. So be that as it may, I just say that to say there is one novelization and everything else is an original story. So that's on my horizon in the future, speaking of novels. But yeah, and then of course we have a lot of other shows on our Always Hold On To network and our Patreon over there. So be sure to check us out at Always Smallville with 1 S on your social medias.
I have to. I read Strange Visitor, I think it was, by Roger Stern back in the day, and it was a Smallville tie-in novel. It was something to do with kind of like faith healers using kryptonite to heal people and stuff like that. It was a really interesting story, and I think the mad quack doctor in it was called Dr. Jacoby, and it's only in recent years I'm like, oh, is that a reference to Twin Peaks? I don't know. Anyway,
the only TV novels I ever read were novels related to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Back in the day, I used to read the young adult novels for Buffy the Vampire Slayer in my younger teenage years. But just before we go, I just wanted to say as well, Zach, congratulations on wrapping up Always Will On to the Flash.
Yeah.
Absolutely loved it. Really enjoyed your final episode. So well done with that. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, both of you guys were guests on the show over the years. I know you guys have a both deep love for the 1990 Flash. So that was a fun journey to revisit it. Obviously, it came out on Blu-ray. And we visited it in HD. We had as you both hold up your home video copies. Fantastic stuff. No, I love the Flash 1990. Like my favorite comic book TV show is Smallville. My second favorite comic book TV show is The Flash 1990. So thank you guys.
I'm literally looking at my Flash TV special #1. Still waiting on number 2.
They all
knew the Flash TV special #1. And we all have the DC Multiverse John Wesley Shipp Flash action figure as well. So we're all brothers in arms there.
Excellent.
Okay, do you want to take us out, Alan? You usually
you're putting me on the spot. Everybody, you can find us at All Star Superfan on Facebook and Instagram, at All Star Superpod on Twitter. We're on Threads, we're on BLUESKY, we're at allstarsuperpod@gmail.com. If you want to send us some emails, we did get some emails there in relation to the trailer episode. We might read them out at the end, or maybe even next week or next episode, whatever you want to do. But yeah, that you can find us inside the All Star Superfan Facebook group. Join us. A lot of great discussions there, a lot of fun chats. You'll find us all there. Me, Zach, Rob, Matt Truex, a lot of other people that we've had on the podcast. So yeah, check us out.
I ask you to kill Superman, and you're telling me you couldn't even do that one simple thing.
He's Ukrainian now.
Yeah. They changed that line in the novel. He says single thing and not simple thing, and it makes it less amusing. So I don't know if that's a Robert Vaughn maybe changing it on the script, or maybe I don't know, but just throwing that out there.
Do you want to take us out with the novelization line, Rob?
I ask you to kill Superman, and you're telling me you couldn't even do that one single thing.
Take care, everybody.
I look at all the photographs and every girl's dream. On every smile, a memory of every place I've been. Redheads, blondes, and cool brunettes, loved every girl I found. But I couldn't stick around too long. I like to spread myself around. They won't get me. They won't get me. Some girls love to hold you, but hold you much too long, and tell you they won't tie you down, so I'm up already gone. Some girls love to love you, I love to fill their needs. It breaks my heart to leave them, but there's many more to please. They won't get me. They won't get me. Some girls love to hold you, but hold you much too long, and tell you they won't tie you down, so I'm up already gone. Redheads, blondes, and cool brunettes, loved every girl I found, but I couldn't stick around too long. I like to spread myself around. They won't get me. They won't get me. They won't get me. They won't get me. They won't get me.